How is your confidence on stage impacting the success of your business? We have Chris here today, and he's going to come in here to talk to us a little bit about himself. Of course, we need to get to know him, but then we're also going to talk a little bit about why this topic matters to him and why it should matter to you. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Shona. So my name's Chris. I am living in New Zealand. I'm from New Zealand, and I have been a speaker coach for basically a decade now. I was the speaker coach for TEDx Ruakura, our local TEDx here, and I found my passion. I found my vision, I guess, is that what is a waste in this world is that there are so many great ideas, but people have a real problem expressing them properly. And if they don't express them, then they don't get other people to jump on board with those ideas. And the ideas I'm talking about, we've had speakers that are scientists, activists, business owners, obviously, and everything in between. So whatever it is that is ringing your bell or really making you passionate about getting something done, you need to know how to communicate that in an effective way so that you can really get people on board with you, whether those people on board are customers or whether they're investors or whether, whoever they are. And that's what I do.
That's in a nutshell what you do and why this matters all at once. I love it. It makes perfect sense because surely let's imagine a situation here where somebody's coming up and they're like, actually even better. You know what? Let's simplify this. Hey, what do you do? And they did, and you don't give an answer like what you just gave.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I find is the biggest issue. So I've done a lot of work with people, like I said, TEDx speakers, and also startup founders. And they're very similar in a way because they've spent a long time just focusing down on one really small thing. And then when somebody asks them to say, so a TEDx talk is basically, in 15 minutes, tell me what you've learned in the last 5 years of being a rocket researcher or whatever it is. It's like, how do I do that? And so what we need to, they either, one or two things happens. They either freeze and they have so much in their head, they don't know what to start with. So it's just go, or they try and say everything at once and they just verbally vomit.
I think I've done both of those things. Like, I'm quite certain.
And we've all done it. We've all been in that spot where we've got usually something we're not prepared for and we're like, and we'll either start talking and try to catch up with our brains.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done that, Shauna. I've done that. Or we sort of freeze and go, I don't know how to answer that. So that's a big part of what I do is really help people get very clear about what it is that they need to get across, because that clarity is the foundation of everything. And it's the same for any communication. So I'm talking about speaking, but if you're in business and say you're writing a book, exactly the same thing. Your social media communications, if you don't have that clarity and that clear idea of what your vision is and the transformation you're offering people, then you can't put those social media posts out, or rather, if you do, they're not going to be as impactful.
No, they wind up really just being the stuff of the internet.
Yeah.
Content for the sake of content is not valuable. You want to make sure that you're being clear and intentional about what you're putting out into the world. And that rings true for whether you're giving a TEDx speech or whether you are introducing yourself to a prospective strategic alliance, a joint venture partner, or maybe a prospective client.
Yeah. And the more, so people talk about the confidence, and you brought up confidence at the beginning. And there's two aspects, probably three really. I often say confidence comes from competence. You need to know what you're going to be talking about in order to be confident. If you try to wing it, often that's just procrastination. I'll worry about it later. I'll worry about it later. I'll worry about it later. I'm on stage. Oh, crap. That's basically how that goes. So confidence comes from competence, but also one of the things that most of us do or tend to think is that if we're on stage, or if we're writing a book, if we're writing, we have to do it in a certain way. We write more formally. We speak more formally when we're on stage. We change our behavior and suddenly we're not us.
Right.
We're trying to be someone else. And this is authenticity. And we hear authenticity all the time, but people don't sort of take the time to think about it. Authenticity is really just saying, this is what I'd say and this is how I'd say it. And sometimes you need to practice that beforehand, because if they're going to ask you a question you've never answered it before, you're not quite sure how you're going to say it. So you actually need to practice answering those questions. So very important for startup founders when they're going to be pitching, particularly for investment and things, that they practice those. And you see, you're in the States, presidential debates and stuff, they practice all that stuff.
Right.
Politics cycle seems to be never ending. It's always election year, or just coming up to an election year, or just past election year.
Yeah, I hear you. I I feel the same way. I get kind of overwhelmed with it because, here in Canada, it's a slightly different situation.
Oh, yeah,
But
you're in Canada, yeah.
that's right. But we have a lot of American viewers and listeners, so they get it, and everybody else gets it too, because we're like, what is happening? I digress. We'll back off.
Not go down that track.
No, that said, I'm curious, because the first thing that I started thinking of is, okay, so I need to practice. So I have to kind of anticipate the questions, which is doable. But what if I'm up there and I've anticipated the questions and I'm really good, but then they ask me some curveball that you're like, oh, do you have any suggestions for how you might
absolutely do for that. Before I answer that, I'm going to let's show this pitching pyramid thing, because it'll explain it a little better. So here we have the pitching pyramid, and we've got the clarity at the bottom. That's the most important thing. And the whole idea of this pyramid, it's not a pyramid scheme. Pitching pyramid sounded better than talking triangle, so I went with pitching pyramid. So the bottom, every level is the base for the level above, and you need to get it solid before you jump into the next one. So you get your clarity right before you start understanding your audience. You get your understanding your audience right before you start creating their journey, both the emotional and logical journey. Then you move to call to action, hook and opening, performance and Q&A. But the problem is a lot of people jump straight to either performance or their hook and opening call to action. And if they haven't done that underlying work, which is a little bit boring, then they haven't done everything else. And the reason I wanted to show you that now is when I answer the Q&A question, that's right on the very tippy top there. So I'm going to give you an answer to that, but I want to make sure you understand that this is not something you can do straight off the bat. So you can.
All right. So that makes sense. Okay. So we're looking at, can I guess? I just would like to guess. I'm seeing this pyramid, and if I were to guess, the answer would be that you're setting up your Q&A so that they only ask you questions that you have an answer for.
Exactly. So when we did, so this whole pitching pyramid was based on what I did with the TEDx, but we didn't do Q&A for TEDx talks, right?
Right.
So the Q&A sort of came when I started working with startup founders. And that was a little bit different, because a lot of those were, you have 5 minutes to pitch and 2 minutes for Q&A. And so you could be very strategic about, we don't want to spend time in that detail. We will seed a question so they'll ask us the right question. And so we did that a lot. That works. And that's what you're saying, is sort of seeding a question. But you also want to have something prepared, a little story, a little anecdote, and a lesson you can get from that anecdote in your back pocket, ready for somebody giving you their curveball. Because occasionally somebody will ask you a question and you'll go, that makes no sense. And you don't want to abuse the person asking the question, right? You don't want to say anything that's stupid to them or make them feel down. And you go, I'm not sure if I got that right, but let me tell you a story that I think might answer the question. And then you go into your story and you go into the lesson. Even if it's way off, people appreciate it. You're not making anyone look bad. You look good. And your credibility from answering a question is actually way higher than your credibility when you are giving a talk. So if somebody asks you the question and you come up with a really good answer, they're way more impressed than if you just come up with that in the talk. So sometimes you want that as your strategic thing.
Oh, that's something I hadn't really thought of. I like that.
Yeah.
That's fun.
I'll tell you another, a big one for people speaking. Don't ever end your talk on Q&A. So what happens with Q&A, and we've all been in the room when this has happened. So let me know if you can see this happening. You're in the room, the person's finished talking, they go, right, any questions? And there's a really good question. And then there's a not as good question. And there's a couple of questions, then okay questions. And they just evolve from there until the last question is, what did you have for breakfast? And that's you walking off stage to a whimper. Yeah. The whole talk that you've built up has just, all that power's been taken away. So what you want to do when you're doing Q&A is you go through your talk, and so you've got your opening, middle, close, if you like. You do sort of a part close, and you go, so we've covered all of this. Now, before I finish up, I just want to see if we've got any questions. We're going to take a couple of minutes of questions. That way you're in control. Right. And then you can say, right, we've run out of time. Let me finish up now. And then you do your last minute, 2-minute closeout that brings the energy back up and puts you in that authority position to finish off with.
Oh, I love that. Important.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, even just like in you saying that, I'm like, yes, yeah, I'm already a cheerleader for the proverbial person who's giving this talk. That's, that's really good. So, okay. So we have a few kind of angles that we can go here. And I'm thinking like, all right, knowing what you're going to talk about, clarity, making sure you have a structure for how you're going to address it, making sure that you have a back pocket plan of action for Q&A, and that you're setting yourself up for success after your Q&A. Those things alone, I feel like, in my humble opinion, set me up with confidence to go up and speak. If anybody watching has any other questions or ideas, absolutely ask, because we're going to be hanging around, of course. We're not going anywhere. We respond to all the comments over on all the podcast platforms, as well as LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all the places. Now, I'm curious though, because you talked about how most people start with the hook.
Yeah.
But that's not the right place. When you said that, I got a little confused, and I'm a content person. So let's go. Bring it.
Okay. All right. That is good. And I need to put that back in perspective. So it's not a bad thing to have a hook when you're starting out, when you're making the idea of what it is you're going to talk about and where you're coming from. So the hook angle type thing is important to sort of have an idea of beforehand. But the opening is the last thing we work on when we're scripting a talk, when we're putting together a talk. Now, when I say we're putting together a talk like this, when you're doing a TEDx, this is a big deal. Like, it's going on the TED platform. It's a big deal. I wouldn't script every talk that I go up and do. I wouldn't script something necessarily for a Rotary, unless it's a talk I give all the time. Then I've sort of got that pretty much down. Right. But some things will be, much more scripted than others. So I'm talking about scripting a big talk, right? So when you're doing that massive, your signature talk, the big thing that is going to be, carrying your brand and building your authority, when you're starting to create it, you do your audience work and you work out your audience journey and know where they're going from and where they're going to. And then you work out and I'm making this real short, but then you work out your call to action, and then you do your opening. And the reason for that is if you do your opening first, which is what we naturally would want to do, as you're building everything else out, you've got to keep going back and tweaking the opening. Because the opening foreshadows where you're going to go, and the opening plants those seeds. And so when you've fleshed out the bulk of it and you've got your ending, your call to action solid, and you know where you are with that, then you can go back to the beginning and say, all right, this is what I need to do to set myself up for the success of that talk. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Like 100%. Even as you were saying, you got to go back and tweak it. Like, I can't tell you how many times I go, oh, this is a great idea for a piece of content of some sort. I put down my idea, and the idea kind of translates into a pseudo title, a hook, right? And then I go through it, and then I have to tweak it, and I go through it, and then I have to tweak it, and then oh my gosh, it's so infuriating. I mean, you need to have that concept. You've
got to have the angle. You've got to have the direction you're going in. You need that. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, it makes if you can sort of go, this is the idea, what's the end point, and work backwards, you'll find it a lot quicker. Not the first time or the second time, but once you get used to it, I think you'll find it a bit quicker. Yeah.
It all takes so much practice, like with everything that you're doing. And this is something that like I want everybody to understand. It's just that, you know, when somebody's doing something, like you simplified this so beautifully, because you've done it. Pardon me. Because you've done it and done it and done it and done it and done it, and again, we can keep going. And people forget that you need to do something until it's absolutely torturous to do, simply because it's so easy for you, before you can get to the point where you can clearly and concisely articulate it the way you just did, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I want to make a point about coaching, and this is a philosophical point, I think.
I like philosophy, so let's dive in.
I have a bit of an issue with, not a strong issue, but I think people need to be cautious about the guru idea that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And I don't believe that's true at all. I think there's a million ways to do anything. And as a coach, my role isn't to tell you what to do. My role is to ask the best questions to get the best outcomes. And what works for me may not work for you. And so a lot of times when I'm coaching people, it's very much, let's play, let's try this, let's throw this idea, let's switch that around and do that backwards. Does that work? No, let's not do that then. But maybe it does work, or more often it goes, no, it didn't quite work, but if we did that and that and that, and then we get somewhere better. So when I say this is what I believe, don't just take my word for it and say this is the gospel.
This is law.
Yeah, it's law. It's just what I've found to be useful in most cases. And it's like, the thing about learn the rules so you can break them. Absolutely. I break the rules all the time. But the point is, you need to know what those rules are, or why those rules are, in order to then break them for the best effect.
Yes. Yeah. I used to have a flag on my desk that I would wave when somebody says something that was just like, yes. I cannot endorse that mentality enough. There are too many people who try, and I started this, oh goodness, like 8 years ago when I was doing conversion copywriting and only conversion copywriting. I'd get so many people who would play copycat copy. They would say, well, so-and-so wrote their sales page exactly like this, so I want my sales page to look exactly like this. And I say, girl, you are not that person. No. It may be working for them. That's great, but it may not work for you. And in fact, there's certain elements that I can already tell are red flags that would not work for you and your brand. And people don't realize these things. They just see somebody who's successful and think that they can just embody that person and also become successful. It's not the way it works.
And that brings us back to something that I didn't quite answer before, which was when we're talking about confidence. That other thing is being comfortable with your authenticity, being comfortable being with you, which is what you're absolutely doing in that conversion copy. Is if you're not being you, it's a red flag to everybody else, because they know that's not you, right? They're just like, who's this person trying to be? But if you're just being you and you're just like, take it or leave it, this is who I am. If you don't like who I am, don't do business with me. I mean, no offense. I'm cool with that. If you're cool with that, because we don't get on, that's fine. But I'm just going to be who I am. And that's, I think, all of us can do. And when you're on stage, that's amplified,
Yes, 100%. And this is, I have a concept that I put out into the world, and it's called comfortably confident. So I love that you used comfortable authenticity. I was like, oh, I'm excited. This is right. So comfortably confident. It is just that acceptance of who you are is perfectly powerful.
Yeah.
In its own unique way, because there are people who, they'll say, when you show up on camera or when you do a podcast, it needs to have this format. No, it doesn't. And in fact, I'm going to argue that more often than not, when you break the mold, when you shake up the status quo, you're actually going to wind up becoming more successful, as long as you're doing it in alignment with who you are and what resonates most to you. That's actually a really great marketing strategy. Is to just
absolutely, because nobody else is you. you're immediately a category of one because
Yes.
you're unique. And having said that, it does take practice to be yourself. Like you just don't go out of the gate and be you. It's quite often. And I know I'm comfortable standing on stage and talking. I know in my writing, I still struggle to find my voice a little, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
And it's that same thing. It just takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of self-awareness and a little bit of courage, let's say. But yeah,
A lot of bit of courage, my friend. A lot of bit of courage.
but
You
yeah,
gotta do
so
it.
it's interesting because one of the biggest drawbacks that people have is that we've already said they try to be someone they're not, or they think, excuse me, or they think, what have I got to offer the audience? Why would they listen to me is like the biggest question. And even these experts that know a lot of stuff, they'll go, but there's other experts that know more than me. Well, why would they listen to me? And if you can get back to that authenticity, some people will resonate with you better than that guy that knows twice as much as you. And they'll get more out of talking to you or listening to you than they will from the other guy, even though he knows more.
Absolutely.
And you need to keep that in mind. It's really important.
I used to say, and I still say this, let me just be clear, but I've been saying this for a long time. There are people out there in this world who are sitting on their hands waiting, just waiting for you to say what you have to say as only you can say it.
100%.
And it's simply the truth. Now, that said, when we're showing up as ourselves, if we're doing a TED Talk, or if we're doing a sales pitch, maybe we're showing up in a capacity where you're actually looking for conversion. Before we close out, do you have any kind of ideations that you would like to share with people to help them convert a little bit better in when they're presenting?
If you have real clarity about what it is you're trying to do, and you have clarity about the transformation you're offering those people that you're talking to, your ideal clients or whatever it is, and you've worked your audience journey well, and we haven't talked about that, so I think that really is the nutshell. If your audience journey, so when you start with your audience, they know what they know.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the talk, you know where you want them to be and you know what you want them to know. So they're moving from here to here. And then in between, there's going to be a bunch of objections because they started here, they believe this one thing. You want them to believe this other thing. And what are those objections? And you create, I call them objection gates. You've got to go through these gates. So put them in an order, whatever order it's going to be. This one's the first one. Price, by the way, is usually the last one. If you answer the last one first, what happens psychologically in their mind? They go, yeah, but I don't care about that. I'm still worried about this thing. Mm. And then you answer these other things. Then you answer the one they go, that makes sense. What was all that other stuff? and you've got to start from the beginning again, right? Which you can't do from a talk. So it's really important that you get those objection gates and get them pretty much in the right order. And then you don't just say, you have this objection, blah, blah, blah. You tell a story that illustrates somebody that had that problem, how they overcame it. And it naturally, through the talk, covers these objections. And you go through these objection gates. If you do that well, and if you know those audience and know where you're going and you make sense with all of that and that transformation makes sense, when you get to the end, the close should be pretty simple.
Because you've already addressed anything that they could possibly have put out there.
Yeah.
Now that's pretty darn powerful as it is, but I know that just based on our conversation here and our conversations in the past, you have so much more to offer. So what I want to invite you to do is to share some final thoughts, something that you need to say. If there's something that's aching in your bones and you need to tell the audience this, please, I invite you to do so now.
Okay, so everybody has those ideas in them, and they really need to think about what they want to say and how they're going to say it, who they're going to say it to. I'm happy to be helping people with that sort of thing. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, ask me some questions. This year, I've got a little thesis I'm working on, and it is that there's going to be so much content generated by AI that value of content and courses are going to drop. And so what I'm going to be doing this year, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on this year, is doing some workshops where you walk away with something that you've learned from that workshop. So it's not just you learning something, you've got the outcome. And I'm working on, I was hoping to have it ready for this, but it's coming up soon, a hook creation workshop. And we're going to do that with a small number of people. I'm going to be doing that for free. So, because I want to test it and work it out and all that sort of thing. So if you're interested in doing a hook creation workshop with me for free, link up in LinkedIn, and I'll let you know when we're ready to do that.
That's amazing. And definitely something that if you're watching this right now or listening to it, message Chris. This is a good opportunity. So with that, I want to invite you all to make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, share, to make sure that everybody hears this news, to make sure that everybody is on board for the next episode. Because remember, we share at least one episode every single week where we get to have conversations with people like Chris who are making massive impacts in their industry. With that, thank you, Chris, for being on the show. And thank you all for joining us for this conversation. We will catch you on the next one.